Hello and welcome to the third video on our series on the effect of housing net worth on employment. This video is very important for us because it's where we are actually going to go through the econometric exercise that the authors are going to employ to look at the effect of housing net worth on employment. So let's see what they do. Let's first see exactly how the authors go about thinking that they need to pay attention directly to the non-tradable sector. And so here is what they say. They want to know the employment consequences of a decline in net worth, but, and here I quote, estimating this is complicated by the fact that reduction in spending as a result of net worth decline in an area impacts the employment in all other areas, paraphrasing, through the trade channel, making it difficult to trace the employment effect of local net worth shocks. And so the problem they have is they want to know what the effect of local demand is on employment. But you can see that if there is a recession that's affecting other places in the economy, say for example you live in Detroit, but there is a recession originated in New York, and so people all over the country are buying less cars, then employment in Detroit might go down even though there was no shock to Detroit. So that's the type of problem they have. So to overcome this, they're going to focus on the effects of changes in net worth on only non-tradable employment. And this is the type of regression they are going to run. This regression, if you haven't seen it, is just a way to get the statistical relationship, the statistical correlation between a change in housing net worth and a change in non-tradable employment. As we've seen in the problem set, the fact that we're applying the log to this change makes it so that this change is in percentage terms. So this approximates the percentage change in employment in the non-tradable sector as a result of a change in housing net worth. If you remember from the previous video, we're already measuring the housing net worth change in percentage terms. So this eta term, it's going to be an elasticity. It's going to measure what the percentage change is in employment in the non-tradable sector as a response to a change in a percentage change in housing net worth. Okay, so eta is going to be, eta is the name of this Greek letter. It's going to be the parameter of interest here. We want to know what that relationship is. Here's how the data looks like. And what you can see is that, yes, there is a lot of variation. Each of these dots, it's going to be a different county. The left panel, it's showing change in housing net worth against change in non-tradable employment, measuring non-tradable as only restaurants and retail. That's the first measure of what makes an industry being non-tradable. And what you see is that even though there is a ton of noise and these points are everywhere, when you do look around how these points are organized, the relationship is positive. Higher changes in net worth imply higher changes in non-tradable employment. Or put another way, a larger decrease in net worth is associated with a larger decrease in non-tradable employment. The right panel is doing the exact same exercise, but using the second measure of non-tradable. This is based on low geographical concentration. Okay, and we see that regardless of the measure we're using, the picture looks very similar and the effects are very much alike. Larger increases in housing net worth are associated with larger increases in non-tradable employment, or put the other way, a large decrease in housing net worth, it's associated with a large decrease in employment in the non-tradable sector. And here we can see the outcome of our regression. We find that the coefficient of interest is positive and it is significant. Okay, so what do we know? We know there is a strong positive correlation between changes in net worth and employment. So on average, counties with bigger changes or bigger declines in housing net worth also experienced a larger decline in non-tradable employment between 2007 and 2009. That's all well and good. But this relationship is not causal. This is just saying, look, these two things happen at the same time, but we don't know if the change in housing net worth caused the change in employment. And that's what we want to know. We want to know what the mechanism is behind the decrease in employment. We want to be able to say what caused it. And the reason we cannot say this caused it is that there might be other factors behind the decrease of both the prices and the employment. There might be shocks to industries in that county that also affect net worth and employment. There might be a different sectoral composition of counties. So perhaps the recession hit harder certain types of industries. And because of that different composition of the counties, it just turned out that the counties with the most industries affected were also the counties that had the larger decreases in prices. And so these relationship that we find here might just be coincidence. So what we're going to do now is to control for several other factors so that we can be certain that what we're finding is actually the causal relationship. So let us think about the first critique. Certain industries might be harder hit during recession. So if a county's employment is concentrated on a sensitive industry, this will affect consumers. And so if that sector, if that industry is in trouble, consumers are going to be laid off, that's going to decrease demand, and that's going to lower housing prices. So we have a problem because at the same time we have lower housing prices and lower employment, but this wasn't originated in the housing prices. This was actually originated on the type of industry they had. This is what we call a reverse causality problem, where perhaps we're reading the graph wrong, and it's not that changes in housing generate changes in employment, but the changes in employment generate changes in housing. So how can we get rid of this reverse causality problem? Well, we can include the share of each county's employment in all of these 23 industries. So if the real reason we had seen that positive correlation is because of the industries, we should see now that after controlling for the importance of each industry in each county, that effect should go away. But we actually find it doesn't. It becomes a little bit lower in value, but it is still significant. And so we can still say that even after controlling for the types of industries that are in each and every one of these counties, it is still the case that counties with higher changes in net worth had higher changes in employment as well. The next problem is a bit harder because the Great Recession was particularly harsh for the construction sector. And what happens to the construction sector, it's definitely going to affect housing prices. So perhaps counties where house prices and hence net worth fell the most also had greater exposure to the construction sector. And the reason that employment is going down is not because of the change in net worth, it's because of the changes in the construction sector. So that's very worrisome for how we want to interpret the results. Again, we want to go from correlation to causation. This is what we call an endogeneity problem. To solve this problem, we need to isolate the portion of the change in housing net worth that comes only from changes in prices and not from changes in the construction sector. The second bullet puts it very nicely. We want the instrument to be something related to changes in prices, but independent of the exposure to the construction sector, so that we know that the variation we are using in prices is really exogenous. The solution that the authors come up with is they want to use changes in net worth explained by differences in the elasticity of housing supply. What is that? Well, it's an objective index of the ease with which new housing can be expanded in a metropolitan area. The index gives a high elasticity score to a metropolitan area if it has a topology. So, that means if it's flat, etc. without many water bodies such as lakes and oceans. In contrast, metropolitan areas with a hilly terrain or restricted supply are going to have low elasticity. So what does this mean? This doesn't depend on the importance of the construction sector. This doesn't depend on anything but the terrain in which the cities in the county are built. And so places like New York City, which are surrounded by water, have very low elasticity of housing supply. That means that the changes in prices are basically because you cannot build a lot more because every square inch that you can build in Manhattan has already been built. Something similar happens in San Francisco. But if you go to the Midwest, to Iowa, to Minnesota, these are flatter regions where you can easily expand housing. And so prices there are going to be less affected. And so this is what the authors are going to explain here. Counties with less elastic supply are going to suffer larger changes in prices. But these changes in prices are independent of other factors, like the ones listed here. The importance is that these are the portion of the changes in prices that are explained because of the terrain and not because of the exposure to the construction sector or to other types of endogenous variables. So what happens when we control for this? Well, when we can isolate the actual effect of changes in prices, the effect on employment is way more stronger. It is a larger effect than the one we had before. And so what we're going to conclude from this is that actually we have very good evidence that there is a causal link from changes in housing prices to changes in employment in the non-tradable sector.